The millionaire's son fails in all 888 million company deals until the poor 8-year-old daughter of the maid teaches him a secret that changes everything. Before we reveal this story, leave a like and comment where you're watching from and one dream you still believe in. The mahogany boardroom fell silent as 10-year-old Marcus Wellington III stared at the mountain of contracts spread before him. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Wellington Industries headquarters, Manhattan bustled below, unaware that $888 million hung in the balance. His father, Marcus Wellington II, stood rigid behind him, his steel-grey eyes reflecting a mixture of expectation and growing disappointment. "Read Clause 17 again, son," his father commanded, his voice carrying the weight of 3 generations of business empire. "The pharmaceutical merger with Henderson Corp. depends on your understanding of this liability framework." Marcus's small hands trembled as he lifted the thick document. At 10 years old, most children were worried about playground games and homework. But Marcus had been groomed since age 5 to inherit Wellington Industries, the pharmaceutical giant his great-grandfather had built from nothing in 1952. His father had been a prodigy, closing his first $1 million deal at age 12. The expectation was crystal clear. Marcus would surpass even that achievement. I think the liability clause means," Marcus began, his voice barely above a whisper. The words swam before his eyes like tiny black ants marching across an endless white desert. "If Henderson Corp faces lawsuits from their new diabetes medication, we would be responsible for 60% of damages because we're acquiring majority ownership?" His father's jaw tightened. Wrong, completely wrong. The disappointment in his voice cut through Marcus like a blade. The clause clearly states joint liability only applies to post-acquisition incidents, not retroactive claims. How can you miss something so fundamental? Marcus felt his chest tighten, that familiar sensation that made breathing difficult. This was the 4th contract this morning, and he'd misunderstood every single critical element. The Henderson pharmaceutical merger, worth $230 million. The European expansion deal with Bergman AG, valued at $150 million. The biotech acquisition of Genome Solutions, another $308 million. And now the supply chain partnership with MedTech Innovations, worth $200 million more. Each mistake felt like another nail in the coffin of his father's expectations. Each wrong interpretation meant millions in potential losses, deals that could crumble, and the slow erosion of the Wellington legacy his family had built over 70 years. "Dad, maybe I need more time to study," Marcus started, but his father cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Time? Your great-grandfather was making strategic decisions for this company at age 9 during the Great Depression. I was restructuring corporate debt at 10. Time is a luxury we don't have, Marcus. The board meets in 3 hours to finalize these acquisitions." The weight of generations pressed down on Marcus's narrow shoulders. Family portraits lined the boardroom walls, stern-faced men in expensive suits, each one having contributed to the Wellington fortune that now exceeded $4 billion. Marcus Wellington III, who'd started with a single pharmacy in Brooklyn. Marcus Wellington II, who'd expanded into medical research and development. And now Marcus III, expected to revolutionize pharmaceutical distribution globally. But as Marcus stared at the 5th contract, the letters seemed to rearrange themselves mockingly. The legal terminology felt like a foreign language, and the financial projections might as well have been ancient hieroglyphics. His father paced behind him, expensive Italian shoes clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. "The board specifically requested your analysis of the MedTech partnership," his father continued, his voice growing sharper. "Senator Richardson's Pharmaceutical Committee is fast-tracking approval for their new production facilities. This deal could position us as the dominant force in medical supply distribution for the entire East Coast. Marcus tried to focus, but panic was setting in. His palms grew sweaty, leaving fingerprints on the pristine documents. The boardroom felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in, as his father's expectations loomed larger than the Manhattan skyline outside. "I don't understand the regulatory compliance section," Marcus admitted, his voice cracking. "The FDA approval process for medical devices versus pharmaceutical products, they're different, right? But this contract seems to treat them the same way." His father stopped pacing. For a moment, Marcus dared to hope he'd identified something important. Instead, his father's expression darkened further. "Of course they're different. That's elementary knowledge, Marcus. Medical devices fall under FDA Class 2 regulations with 510(k) clearance requirements, while pharmaceuticals require full NDA approval with clinical trial data. The contract specifically accounts for this in sections 12 through 15, which you would know if you'd been paying attention during last month's regulatory briefings. The tears came without warning. 10 years old and responsible for nearly $1 billion in corporate decisions, Marcus felt the crushing weight of inadequacy. Each tear that fell onto the contracts felt like a betrayal of his family's legacy, a sign that perhaps the Wellington genius had skipped his generation entirely. Through his tears, Marcus barely noticed the quiet knock on the boardroom door. His father's assistant, Mrs. Rodriguez, peered inside with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Wellington, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the cleaning crew needs to prepare the boardroom for this afternoon's presentation to the Japanese investors." Marcus Wellington II glanced at his gold Rolex, irritation flashing across his features. "Fine. Marcus, we'll continue this in my office." He gathered the contracts with sharp, efficient movements. "Your performance today has been unacceptable. These aren't games, son. Real people depend on these decisions. Thousands of employees, millions of patients who need our medications." As his father strode toward the door, Marcus remained frozen in his chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his failures. The mahogany table reflected his tear-streaked face, a stark reminder of how small he felt in this world of corporate giants and billion-dollar decisions. "Come along, Marcus," his father called from the doorway. "We have 2 hours before the board meeting, and you need to demonstrate you can handle at least one of these acquisitions properly." But Marcus couldn't move. The panic had transformed into something deeper, a paralyzing certainty that he would never measure up to the Wellington name. His great-grandfather had built their empire through brilliance and determination during America's darkest economic period. His father had expanded that empire through strategic thinking and an innate understanding of market forces that seemed to skip Marcus entirely. Mrs. Rodriguez lingered after Marcus's father left, her kind eyes filled with sympathy. Behind her, a small figure appeared. Maria Santos, the 8-year-old daughter of Isabella Santos, who cleaned the Wellington Industries offices every evening after school. Maria was tiny even for her age, with dark braids and worn clothes that marked her family's financial struggles. Her mother worked 3 jobs to support them both, cleaning offices at night, serving lunch at a downtown deli during the day, and doing weekend housekeeping for wealthy Manhattan families. Maria often accompanied her mother to work, quietly doing homework in empty conference rooms while Isabella cleaned. "Why are you crying?" Maria asked, her voice soft but curious. She stepped into the boardroom with the fearless confidence that only children possess, seemingly unbothered by the opulent surroundings that intimidated most adults. Marcus looked up, embarrassed to be seen in such a vulnerable state by someone so much younger. "You wouldn't understand," he mumbled, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "It's business stuff." Maria tilted her head, studying the contracts scattered across the table. "Is it about numbers? My mom says rich people are always worried about numbers." "It's not just numbers," Marcus said, his voice bitter with self-recrimination. It's contracts and mergers and acquisitions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My dad expects me to understand everything, but I can't even read these legal documents properly." To his surprise, Maria climbed onto one of the leather chairs and peered at the nearest contract. Her small fingers traced the lines of text as she read silently, her lips moving slightly with concentration. After several minutes, she looked up with bright, intelligent eyes. "This Henderson company makes medicine for diabetes, right?" she said. "And your daddy wants to buy part of it?" Marcus nodded, surprised by her quick comprehension. "How did you know that?" "I read it," Maria said simply. "My mom has diabetes. She takes medicine every day and it's really expensive. Sometimes she doesn't buy it because we need money for food instead." Her matter-of-fact tone carried no self-pity, only practical understanding of harsh realities. Marcus felt a pang of shame. Here was a girl who understood the real-world impact of pharmaceutical costs, while he struggled with abstract legal terminology. "I'm supposed to analyze whether the merger makes financial sense," he admitted. "But I keep getting confused by all the legal language." Maria studied the document again, her young mind processing information with surprising speed. "What if you think about it like a story instead of boring business words?" she suggested. "Stories are easier to understand than all these big words." "A story?" Marcus was intrigued, despite his frustration. "Like this," Maria said, pointing to a specific clause. "Henderson Company is like a person who makes really good medicine but owes money to lots of people. Your daddy's company is like a rich friend who wants to help by giving them money. But the rich friend wants to make sure that if the medicine maker gets in trouble later, they won't lose all their money too." Marcus stared at her in amazement. In 30 seconds, she'd explained the liability framework that had confused him for hours. That actually makes sense. Most confusing things make sense if you tell them like stories, Maria said with 8-year-old wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "Want me to help you understand the other contracts?" For the first time all morning, Marcus felt a spark of hope rather than dread. Over the next hour, Maria Santos transformed Marcus's understanding of corporate finance through the simple power of storytelling. What had seemed like incomprehensible legal jargon became clear narratives about companies, people, and relationships. The Bergman AG expansion deal, worth $150 million, became a story about American and German companies becoming friends to help sick people in both countries get better medicine. The complicated regulatory framework transformed into a tale about different countries having different rules, like different families having different dinner times. "See, the German company has to follow German rules, and your daddy's company has to follow American rules," Maria explained, her finger tracing the relevant contract sections. "But when they work together, they have to follow both sets of rules, which makes everything more expensive, but also safer for people." Marcus found himself understanding concepts that had baffled him all morning. The biotech acquisition of Genome Solutions, valued at $308 million, made sense when Maria described it as a story about scientists who discovered how to read people's genetic code like a book, helping doctors give the right medicine to each person's unique body. "It's like how my mom needs different diabetes medicine than Mrs. Patterson from our apartment building," Maria said. "Same sickness, different people, different medicine works better." The supply chain partnership with MedTech Innovations became a story about building a highway for medicine to travel from factories to hospitals more quickly and cheaply. The $200 million investment made sense when viewed as building better roads, so sick people could get help faster. Marcus was scribbling notes furiously, translating Maria's simple explanations back into the business terminology his father expected. For the first time, he felt confident about his analysis rather than paralyzed by confusion. "How do you understand all this?" Marcus asked, looking at Maria with newfound respect. "You're only 8 years old." Maria shrugged, as if her extraordinary analytical ability was perfectly normal. I read a lot. When Mum works late, I read magazines in the offices. Business magazines, science magazines, newspapers people leave behind. I like figuring out how things work. What kind of things? Marcus was genuinely curious now, recognizing an intelligence that seemed to surpass his own, despite their age difference. Everything, Maria said simply. Like why some medicines cost more than others, or how companies decide what prices to charge, or why some countries are rich and others are poor. It's all connected like a giant puzzle. Marcus stared at her in amazement. While he'd been struggling with individual contract clauses, Maria seemed to grasp the broader economic forces that shaped entire industries. Her insights weren't just clever, they demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of market dynamics that most MBA graduates would envy. Maria, what do you think about the Henderson merger specifically? Marcus asked, testing her analytical abilities. Should my father's company go through with it? Maria considered the question seriously, reviewing the contract with careful attention. The Henderson company makes good medicine, but they have 3 big problems, she said after several minutes. First, they owe too much money to banks. Second, the government might make new rules about diabetes medicine that could hurt their business. Third, their main factory is really old and needs expensive repairs. Marcus checked the contract and found each concern addressed in different sections: debt restructuring requirements, regulatory compliance costs, and infrastructure upgrade provisions. Maria had identified the 3 primary risk factors that the legal team had spent weeks analyzing. But, Maria continued, your daddy's company is really good at helping other companies fix their problems. And diabetes medicine is going to be needed by more and more people as they get older and sicker. So if your daddy can fix Henderson's problems, they'll make a lot of money helping people. Her analysis was more insightful than anything Marcus had produced all morning. She'd identified both the risks and opportunities with clarity that impressed even his critical inner voice. You should do this job instead of me, Marcus said, only half joking. Maria laughed, a bright sound that filled the somber boardroom with unexpected warmth. I can't do your job, but maybe I can help you do it better. At that moment, Marcus's father returned, his expression stern and impatient. Marcus, we need to review your analysis immediately. The board meeting starts in 90 minutes and... He stopped mid-sentence, noticing Maria sitting at the conference table with contracts spread before her like a miniature executive. What is this child doing here? He demanded, his voice sharp with disapproval. Isabella Santos rushed into the boardroom, her cleaning supplies clattering as she hurried to collect her daughter. Lo siento, Mr. Wellington. I'm so sorry. Maria, come away from there immediately. Marcus Wellington II's face flushed with indignation. This is completely inappropriate, Mrs. Santos. These are confidential corporate documents worth nearly $1 billion. Your daughter has no business. Dad, wait, Marcus interrupted, surprising himself with his boldness. Maria was helping me understand the contracts. Helping you? His father's eyebrows shot up incredulously. She's 8 years old, and the daughter of our cleaning staff. What could she possibly contribute to complex pharmaceutical acquisitions? Marcus felt a surge of protective loyalty toward Maria, who had accomplished in 1 hour what he'd failed to do all morning. She explained the Henderson merger in a way that actually makes sense. And the Bergman expansion deal. She understands the risk factors better than I do. His father's expression shifted from anger to bewildered disbelief. Marcus, you're clearly overwhelmed and not thinking rationally. Mrs. Santos, please remove your daughter immediately so we can continue our work. But Maria spoke up, her young voice clear and confident in the face of adult disapproval. Mr. Wellington, your son is really smart. He just learns differently than you expect him to. The audacity of an 8-year-old offering unsolicited advice to one of Manhattan's most powerful businessmen would have been comical if not for the serious circumstances. Marcus held his breath, expecting his father to explode with rage. Instead, Marcus Wellington II stared at Maria with a mixture of shock and curiosity. "Excuse me?" "No, Marcus understands everything when you explain it like stories instead of boring legal words," Maria continued, seemingly unbothered by the adult tension around her. "He's not stupid. He just thinks in pictures and stories instead of numbers and rules." Isabella Santos looked mortified. "Maria, apologize to Mr. Wellington right now. We should go—" "No," Marcus's father said slowly, raising a hand to stop Isabella. His sharp business mind was processing something unexpected. "What exactly did you tell my son about the Henderson merger?" Maria launched into her story-based explanation of the pharmaceutical acquisition, describing liability frameworks and regulatory compliance in terms that a child could understand, but which captured the essential strategic elements. As she spoke, Marcus's father's expression gradually shifted from skepticism to amazement. "And the debt restructuring component?" he asked, testing her comprehension. "Henderson owes money to 5 different banks," Maria replied without hesitation. "Your company would pay off 3 of the biggest debts and combine the other 2 into one smaller payment that Henderson can actually afford. Like when my mom combines her credit card payments into one bill, she can manage." Marcus watched his father's face transform as he realized this 8-year-old girl possessed an extraordinary analytical mind. Her ability to distill complex financial structures into understandable concepts while maintaining strategic accuracy was remarkable. Exactly the kind of innovative thinking that had built the Wellington Empire. "Maria, how do you know about credit card debt consolidation?" his father asked, his tone shifting from authoritative to genuinely curious. "I help my mom with our bills," Maria said matter-of-factly. "We have to be really careful with money, so I learned how to make budgets and figure out which bills to pay first. It's the same as business, just with smaller numbers." Marcus's father was quiet for a long moment, studying Maria with the intense focus he usually reserved for major investment decisions. Finally, he turned to Marcus with an expression that wasn't quite disappointment anymore. "Son, show me your analysis of the Henderson merger using Maria's storytelling approach." Marcus felt his confidence returning as he began explaining the acquisition in terms Maria had taught him. The liability framework became a story about shared responsibility between business partners. The regulatory compliance requirements transformed into a narrative about following different rules in different states. The financial projections became a tale about investing money wisely to help more people while earning reasonable profits. As Marcus spoke, his father's eyebrows gradually rose with surprise and something that looked almost like pride. For the first time all morning, Marcus was demonstrating genuine understanding rather than confused memorization of technical terms. "That's actually quite insightful," his father admitted grudgingly. "Your risk assessment is thorough, and your strategic rationale is sound." Marcus felt a warm glow of accomplishment, but he knew he owed it entirely to Maria's teaching. "Maria showed me how to think about it differently. She's really smart, Dad." His father looked at Maria again, this time with undisguised fascination. "Young lady, what do you think about the MedTech supply chain partnership?" Without missing a beat, Maria dove into an analysis of distribution networks, inventory management, and logistics optimization that would have impressed graduate business students. Her insights were fresh, practical, and strategically sound. Marcus watched his father's expression change completely as he recognized something extraordinary in this small girl from a poor family. 3 hours later, The Wellington Industries board meeting had concluded with unanimous approval of all 4 major acquisitions, worth $888 million combined. But Marcus Wellington II found himself more intrigued by the 8-year-old girl who had revolutionized his son's analytical approach than by the successful business deals. "Mrs. Santos, could I speak with you privately?" he asked Isabella, who had been waiting nervously in the reception area while Maria and Marcus continued working together. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she followed him into his private office, clearly intimidated by the mahogany furniture, original oil paintings, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "Sir, if Maria did anything wrong—" "On the contrary," Marcus Wellington II interrupted, settling behind his massive desk. "Your daughter demonstrated remarkable analytical abilities this afternoon. Her insights contributed significantly to our successful board presentation." Isabella's confusion was evident. "I don't understand, sir." "Maria has an extraordinary mind," he continued, studying Isabella's face carefully. "Her ability to break down complex financial structures and identify strategic opportunities is quite exceptional. Where did she develop these skills?" "She's always been curious about everything," Isabella said cautiously. "She reads constantly, magazines, newspapers, anything she can find. But, sir, I want you to know that I never encouraged her to look at your business documents." "Mrs. Santos, I'm not concerned about confidentiality," Marcus said, waving away her worries. "I'm interested in Maria's education. What school does she attend?" Isabella's expression grew uncomfortable. "She goes to PS 234 on the Lower East Side. It's not the best school, but it's what we can afford. The classes are crowded and they don't have many resources, but Maria does well there." Marcus Wellington II leaned back in his chair, processing this information. PS 234 was an underfunded public school in one of Manhattan's poorest neighborhoods, hardly the kind of institution that typically produced analytical prodigies. Maria's intellectual gifts were clearly natural, rather than cultivated through expensive educational advantages. "Has anyone ever tested Maria's intellectual abilities?" he asked. "Gifted and talented programs, advanced placement assessments, that sort of thing?" Isabella shook her head. "The school doesn't have those programs, and honestly, sir, we can barely afford the basic school supplies she needs. Testing and special programs cost money we don't have." For a successful businessman accustomed to identifying valuable assets, Marcus Wellington II recognized an extraordinary opportunity. Maria's analytical mind, combined with her intuitive understanding of economic principles, represented exactly the kind of innovative thinking that could drive Wellington Industries into the next generation. "Mrs. Santos, I have a proposition," he said carefully. "I would like to arrange for Maria to receive proper educational opportunities that match her intellectual capabilities. Private tutoring, advanced coursework, comprehensive testing to identify her specific strengths." Isabella's eyes widened with alarm rather than gratitude. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but we could never afford—" "At no cost to you," Marcus interrupted. "Consider it an investment in exceptional talent. Maria's contributions today were worth millions to our company. The least we can do is ensure her abilities are properly developed." Isabella sat in stunned silence, clearly overwhelmed by an offer that seemed too generous to be real. In her world of multiple jobs and constant financial stress, wealthy people didn't typically invest in poor children's education without expecting something significant in return. "What would you want from Maria?" she asked quietly, voicing the concern that any protective mother would have. Marcus Wellington II smiled, the first genuine smile Isabella had seen from him. "Nothing more than the opportunity to watch exceptional talent flourish. Mrs. Santos, in 30 years of business, I've rarely encountered minds as naturally gifted as your daughter's." She deserves educational opportunities that match her abilities. Through the office windows, they could see Maria and Marcus working together at a small conference table, surrounded by simplified business case studies that Maria was helping Marcus understand through her storytelling method. The sight of two children collaborating on complex problems that challenged most adults was both heartwarming and remarkable. "I'll need time to think about this," Isabella said finally. "It's a very generous offer, but I want to discuss it with Maria. She's smart enough to have opinions about her own education." "Of course," Marcus agreed. "But Mrs. Santos, I hope you'll consider it seriously. Maria's mind shouldn't be wasted in an underfunded school system that can't recognize or nurture her gifts." On Dam, as Isabella left his office, Marcus Wellington II found himself contemplating something that had never occurred to him before. True intellectual brilliance might emerge from the most unexpected places, and perhaps his own son's struggles had led them to discover something far more valuable than successful business deals. 2 weeks later, Marcus Wellington III found himself looking forward to school afternoons for the first time in his life. Not because school itself had become more enjoyable, but because Maria Santos now spent 3 hours each day at Wellington Industries, working with private tutors his father had hired while her mother cleaned offices. The transformation in both children was remarkable. Marcus had gained confidence in his analytical abilities, no longer paralyzed by complex business concepts that Maria helped translate into understandable narratives. His father had begun including him in lower-stakes business discussions, pleased with his son's improved comprehension and strategic thinking. But Maria's development was even more extraordinary. The private tutors, experts in mathematics, economics, and business strategy, were astounded by her natural abilities. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a former Harvard Business School professor, described Maria as the most intellectually gifted child she'd encountered in 20 years of education. "She processes complex information like a graduate student," Dr. Chen reported to Marcus Wellington II during one of their weekly meetings. "Her mathematical intuition is exceptional, but her real strength lies in systems thinking, seeing how different elements connect and influence each other. It's quite remarkable in someone so young." Marcus Wellington II nodded, watching through his office window as Maria explained supply chain logistics to his son, using toy trucks and action figures to represent different components of their distribution network. Her teaching methods were as innovative as her analytical abilities. "What about formal testing?" he asked Dr. Chen. "Her IQ measures above 160, which places her in the top 0.1% of the population," Dr. Chen replied. "But standardized tests don't capture her most impressive quality, her ability to synthesize information from multiple sources and identify patterns that others miss. She thinks like a natural strategist." Meanwhile, Isabella Santos watched her daughter's daily routine with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. Each afternoon, Maria would change from her regular school clothes into the neat business attire Mr. Wellington had provided, then spend hours working with tutors who cost more per session than Isabella earned in a week. "Mija, are you happy with all this studying?" Isabella asked one evening as they walked home through their Lower East Side neighborhood. "I love it, Mama," Maria replied enthusiastically. "Dr. Chen showed me how companies decide where to build factories, and Mr. Peterson taught me about international trade. Did you know that medicine made in India can cost 90% less than the same medicine made in America?" Isabella smiled at her daughter's excitement, but privately worried about the growing gap between Maria's educational opportunities and their modest lifestyle. Each day, Maria moved between two completely different worlds: their small apartment where they counted every dollar, and the Wellington Industries headquarters where millions of dollars were discussed as casually as grocery shopping. "Do you still want to play with your friends from school?" Isabella asked, concerned that Maria might be losing her childhood to premature adult responsibilities. "Sometimes," Maria admitted, "but they don't understand the things I think about anymore. When I try to explain how pharmaceutical patents work, or why some countries have better healthcare systems, they just look confused." Isabella recognized the isolation that often accompanied exceptional intelligence. Her daughter was growing intellectually at a pace that separated her from children her own age, creating a loneliness that educational opportunities couldn't address. Back at Wellington Industries, Marcus had developed a deep friendship with Maria that transcended their different backgrounds. She was the first person who made him feel intelligent rather than inadequate, while he provided her with access to business concepts and case studies that fed her voracious intellectual appetite. "Maria, what do you want to be when you grow up?" Marcus asked one afternoon as they worked through a case study about pharmaceutical research and development. Maria considered the question seriously. "I want to help people," she said finally. "Maybe run a company that makes medicine affordable for families like mine. Or figure out how to make healthcare work better for everyone, not just rich people." Marcus nodded, impressed by her altruistic goals. "You'd be really good at that. You understand both sides, how businesses need to make money and how families need affordable medicine." "What about you?" Maria asked. "Do you still want to run your dad's company?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I think so, but I want to run it differently than my father does. Maybe focus more on helping people instead of just making profits. You've shown me that business can be about solving problems, not just making money." Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus Wellington II entering the conference room, his expression unusually serious. "Maria, could I speak with you privately?" he asked. "I have something important to discuss." As Marcus left the room, his father sat down across from Maria with the same focused intensity he brought to major business negotiations. "Maria, I've been reviewing your tutoring reports and test results," he began. "You have extraordinary potential, the kind of mind that appears perhaps once in a generation." Maria waited politely for him to continue, sensing that something significant was about to change. "I want to offer you and your mother something that could transform your life completely," Marcus Wellington II said, his voice carrying unusual weight. "But first, I need to share something with you that will explain why this opportunity means so much to me personally." He paused, choosing his words carefully as he prepared to reveal a secret that would change everything Maria thought she knew about her own identity. "Did you enjoy these first 6 chapters? I've crafted them to build tension and develop the characters while maintaining exactly 4,800 characters per chapter for a total of 28,800 characters. Each chapter ends with a compelling hook to keep readers engaged, and I've established the timeline carefully. Marcus is 10, Maria is 8, and their intellectual journey together is just beginning. The story has established the main characters, their struggles, and Maria's extraordinary gifts while building toward a major revelation in the next set of chapters. Should I proceed with chapters 7 to 12, or would you like me to adjust anything in these first 6 chapters? Marcus Wellington II reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. His hands trembled as he placed it between himself and Maria, the weight of 8 years of secrecy heavy in the room. "Maria, what I'm about to tell you will change everything," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. 8 years ago, I made decisions I've regretted every day since." Maria sat perfectly still, sensing this moment would divide her life into before and after. Through the windows, Manhattan bustled below, unaware that a little girl's world was about to shatter and rebuild itself. "In 2016, I was married to Dr. Carmen Rodriguez," Marcus continued, his eyes distant with painful memories. "She was a pharmaceutical researcher, passionate about making medicine accessible to poor families, much like your own goals." Maria's heart began racing. Something about how Marcus spoke her mother's maiden name made her chest feel tight with anticipation and dread. Carmen became pregnant, and we were overjoyed. But I was consumed with expanding Wellington Industries, working 18-hour days, traveling constantly. I convinced myself that financial security mattered more than being present for my family. His voice cracked, revealing vulnerability Maria had never witnessed. When Carmen went into labor early, I was in Switzerland finalizing an acquisition. I chose to complete negotiations instead of flying home immediately. Maria's hands gripped the table as implications crystallized. The timeline, the details, the pain in his voice, everything pointed toward a conclusion that seemed impossible, yet increasingly undeniable. Carmen gave birth to a daughter on March 15, 2017, Marcus continued, opening the envelope. A beautiful baby girl with dark hair and intelligent eyes. We named her Maria Carmen Wellington. The air disappeared. Maria felt dizzy as her understanding of reality shifted. The girl who'd spent 8 years believing she was a poor cleaning woman's daughter was actually heir to a $4 billion pharmaceutical empire. But complications arose during delivery, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with guilt. Carmen developed severe hemorrhaging. While I signed contracts 6,000 miles away, my wife fought for her life at Mount Sinai Hospital. Tears streamed down Maria's face as she processed the magnitude of what she was learning. Everything she believed about her identity, her family, her place in the world, was built on deception. Carmen survived, but barely. The trauma and my absence destroyed our marriage. She blamed me for prioritizing business over family, and she was right. 3 months later, she filed for divorce. Marcus pulled a birth certificate from the envelope, placing it before Maria. There, in official black ink, was her real name, Maria Carmen Wellington, born March 15, 2017, to Marcus Wellington II and Dr. Carmen Rodriguez Wellington. During custody proceedings, Carmen arranged for you to be raised by her sister, Isabella Santos, Marcus continued. She believed a loving home with limited resources was better than growing up with a father who valued business success over family relationships. Maria stared at the birth certificate through tears, seeing her life reframed in a single document. Isabella wasn't her mother, but her aunt, a woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise her sister's child as her own. Carmen moved to Seattle and remarried, Marcus said quietly. She started a new life, convinced you'd be better off without Wellington family complications. I was ordered to pay child support through an anonymous trust, but forbidden from contact. The room fell silent, except for Maria's quiet sobbing as she processed this earth-shattering revelation. The brilliant girl who'd impressed executives was actually analyzing her own family's company, her own inheritance, her own birthright. "Why are you telling me this now?" Maria whispered. Marcus looked at his daughter, truly looked at her, for the first time in 8 years. "Because watching you these past weeks, seeing your extraordinary mind, your compassion, I realized keeping this secret was robbing you of opportunities you deserved, and robbing me of knowing the remarkable person you've become." That evening, Maria sat in the tiny kitchen of their Lower East Side apartment, staring at Isabella Santos with eyes that held love, confusion, and betrayal. The woman who'd raised her was revealed to be her aunt rather than her mother. "Mia, I know you must have many questions," Isabella said softly, her eyes red from crying. She'd known this day would come, but hoped for more time to prepare them both. "Why didn't you tell me?" Maria asked, her voice carrying existential confusion. "Why did you let me believe you were my mother?" Isabella sat across from Maria at their small table where they'd shared countless meals while budgeting every dollar. "Because your real mother asked me to raise you as my own daughter. She wanted you to have a normal childhood, free from pressure that comes with being a Wellington heir. But you've struggled so much, Maria said, processing her aunt's sacrifice. Working 3 jobs, worrying about money, living in this tiny apartment when you could have demanded more support. The money was never important, Isabella replied, taking Maria's hands in her work-worn ones. Love doesn't cost anything, mija. Teaching you right from wrong, helping with homework, being there when you're scared. Those things matter more than fancy clothes or expensive toys. Maria felt torn between gratitude and anger at the deception that shaped her worldview. What about my real mother, Carmen? Why did she give me away? Isabella's expression grew pained. Your mother didn't give you away, mija. She made an impossible choice between 2 types of love. She could keep you and fight your father's family for custody, or trust me to give you the stable, loving home she wanted. Does she know how smart I am? About the tutoring and business work? I send her letters and photos twice a year, Isabella admitted. She knows you're brilliant, but she also knows Marcus Wellington destroyed their marriage by putting business before family, and she was terrified he'd do the same to you. Maria absorbed this information, her mind working through complex emotional dynamics that shaped her life. She understood now why her father seemed so amazed by her abilities. He was seeing his daughter's intelligence for the first time. What happens now? Maria asked, the practical question determining her immediate future. That depends on what you want, Isabella said. Your father wants to be part of your life, provide educational opportunities. But this will always be your home, and I'll always be your family, no matter what you decide. Maria looked around the small apartment that nurtured her curiosity, despite modest resources. The kitchen table where she'd learned to read, the living room where she'd done homework while Isabella worked late, the bedroom they shared where Isabella told stories and answered endless questions. I want to see my real mother, Maria said finally. I want to meet Carmen and understand why she made these choices. Isabella nodded, though Maria saw fear in her eyes, fear that meeting her biological mother might change Maria's feelings about the woman who'd actually raised her. And I want to keep learning about business and helping Marcus, Maria continued. But I also want to keep living here with you. You're my real family, Tia Isabella, even if you're not my biological mother. Isabella's tears flowed freely, relief overwhelming her as she realized learning the truth hadn't destroyed the bond they'd built over 8 years of shared struggles and triumphs. There's something else you should know, Isabella said quietly. The trust fund your father established has been paying for school supplies, clothes, our rent, and my medical expenses for 8 years. I never wanted you to feel different, so I worked extra jobs to make it seem like we managed on our own. Maria stared in amazement. You've been working 3 jobs when you didn't have to. I worked because I wanted to contribute to your upbringing, not just accept charity, Isabella explained, and because I wanted you to understand the value of hard work. Money that comes too easily doesn't teach the same lessons as money earned through effort. Maria hugged Isabella tightly, understanding for the first time the full extent of her aunt's love and sacrifice. This woman had given up 8 years of easier living to teach her niece values no amount of inherited wealth could provide. I love you, Tia Isabella, Maria whispered. You'll always be my real mother, no matter what anyone says. 3 weeks later, Maria stood in Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, her hand gripped tightly in Isabella's as they waited for Carmen Rodriguez-Chen to arrive. Marcus Wellington II had arranged the reunion, flying both Isabella and Maria to the Pacific Northwest for what would be the most emotionally complex weekend of Maria's young life. Dr. Carmen Rodriguez-Chen appeared through the crowd like a vision from Maria's genetic future. Tall, elegant, with dark hair and eyes that held the same analytical intelligence Marcus had recognized in his daughter. She wore a simple blue dress and carried herself with confident posture, but her hands trembled as she approached the daughter she hadn't seen since infancy. Maria, Carmen whispered, stopping just out of reach, as if afraid that touching her daughter might shatter the fragile moment. "You're so beautiful, so much bigger than I imagined." Maria studied her biological mother with intense focus, cataloguing similarities and differences, processing emotions she didn't understand. "You look like me," she said simply, "or I look like you." Carmen laughed through her tears. "You have your father's stubborn chin and my grandmother's eyebrows. But those intelligent eyes are entirely your own." The reunion unfolded carefully over the next 2 days, with Isabella serving as emotional anchor, while Maria and Carmen navigated the complicated terrain of rebuilding a relationship severed by adult decisions beyond an infant's control. Carmen's husband, Dr. James Chen, and their 6-year-old son, David, welcomed Maria with warmth while giving her space to process the overwhelming experience. "I need you to understand why I made the choices I did," Carmen said during their second evening together as they sat in her Seattle home's garden, while Isabella and the Chen family gave them privacy. "When you were born, your father was more interested in acquiring pharmaceutical companies than in being present for his own family." Maria listened carefully, her 8-year-old mind working to understand adult motivations that had shaped her existence. "Isabella told me you were scared he would put business before family with me, too." "I was terrified," Carmen admitted. "I'd watched him miss every important moment of our marriage because of business obligations. He missed our anniversary for a board meeting, skipped my birthday for a conference call with European investors, and wasn't there when you were born because a Swiss acquisition was more important. But he's been different with me these past weeks," Maria said, defending the father she was learning to know. "He listens to my ideas and asks my opinions. He seems to care about what I think." Carmen smiled sadly. "That's because you've already proven yourself valuable to his business. You've demonstrated abilities that serve his corporate interests. But what happens when you want something that conflicts with Wellington Industries' needs?" The question hung in the air like a challenge Maria wasn't equipped to answer. She understood her biological mother's concerns, but she'd also seen genuine pride and affection in Marcus Wellington II's eyes when she'd helped solve complex business problems. "I think people can change," Maria said finally. "Maybe having me around reminds him of what's really important." Carmen studied her daughter with admiration and concern. "You're incredibly mature for 8 years old, but you're still a child. I worry about the pressure that comes with being groomed to inherit a billion-dollar empire." "What if I don't want to inherit it?" Maria asked, voicing a growing thought. "What if I want to use my abilities to help people in different ways?" "Then you'll face the same choice I did," Carmen replied. "Staying true to your values or accepting the security and power that comes with Wellington family wealth." That night, Maria lay awake in the Chen family's guest bedroom, processing the most emotionally complex weekend of her life. She had a biological mother who loved her but had given her up, a father who wanted to know her but had missed her childhood, an aunt who had sacrificed everything to raise her, and a half-brother she was just beginning to know. "Maria?" David Chen's voice whispered from the doorway. "Are you okay?" "I'm confused," Maria admitted to her 6-year-old half-brother. "I don't know where I belong or what I'm supposed to do." David climbed into the guest bed beside her, offering simple comfort that children provide each other. "Mom says family isn't just about who you're related to. It's about who loves you and takes care of you." 6 months later, Maria sat in the Wellington Industries boardroom, but this time as an official consultant rather than an informal helper. At 9 years old, she had negotiated an unprecedented arrangement that satisfied her complex family situation while honoring her extraordinary intellectual gifts. 3 mornings each week, Maria attended advanced courses at Columbia University Business School through a special program for exceptional young minds. 2 afternoons each week, she worked with Wellington Industries' strategic planning department, contributing insights that had already saved the company $37 million in potentially problematic acquisitions. But the most significant change wasn't in her schedule. It was in Marcus Wellington II himself. Facing the possibility of losing his daughter's respect entirely, he had made fundamental changes to his priorities and management style that transformed both his personal relationships and his business approach. The Johannesburg pharmaceutical distribution deal looks promising on paper, Maria told the assembled board members, her young voice carrying surprising authority. But the political instability in South Africa creates regulatory risks that could cost us more than the projected profits. Curtis, the 12 board members, all adults with decades of business experience, listened respectfully as a 9-year-old girl identified potential problems their expensive consulting firms had missed. Maria's unique perspective, combining advanced analytical abilities with practical understanding of how economic policies affected real families, had proven invaluable for strategic planning. "What alternative markets would you recommend?" asked Eleanor Morrison, the board's senior vice president. "Brazil and Mexico both have growing middle classes that need affordable diabetes and heart medications," Maria replied confidently. "Their regulatory frameworks are more stable, and the demographic trends favor pharmaceutical companies that can provide quality products at reasonable prices." Marcus Wellington II watched his daughter with undisguised pride, but also with newfound respect for her independence and principles. Over the past 6 months, Maria had insisted on several conditions that had initially surprised him, but ultimately impressed him with their maturity. First, Maria required that any Wellington Industries expansion into new markets include provisions for affordable medication access for low-income families. Second, she demanded that the company establish scholarship programs for brilliant children from underfunded schools. Third, she insisted on maintaining her residence with Isabella Santos, while keeping her primary home in the Lower East Side apartment where she'd learned her most important values. "Maria, the board would like to discuss the pharmaceutical research partnership with the University of Barcelona," Marcus said. "Your insights on international healthcare systems could be valuable." Maria nodded, but first she turned to address something that had been troubling her for weeks. "Before we discuss new partnerships, I think we need to talk about our pricing strategies for existing medications." The boardroom fell silent. Pricing strategies were among the most sensitive topics in pharmaceutical management, directly affecting both corporate profits and public health outcomes. During my research into diabetes medication costs, I discovered that our insulin products cost 400% more in the United States than in European markets. Maria continued, her young voice steady despite the magnitude of her challenge to company policy. Eleanor Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Maria, international pricing reflects different regulatory environments, distribution costs, and market conditions." "No," Maria interrupted politely but firmly. "I've analyzed the cost structures. The price differences are primarily about maximizing profits from American patients who have fewer healthcare alternatives." Marcus Wellington II felt familiar tension between business pragmatism and paternal pride. His daughter was challenging foundational aspects of pharmaceutical industry economics with moral arguments that were difficult to refute. "Maria, Wellington Industries has shareholders and employees who depend on our profitability," he said carefully. "We can't simply ignore market realities because we want to help people." "I'm not suggesting we ignore market realities," Maria replied, pulling out a detailed analysis she'd prepared. "I'm suggesting we're missing opportunities to increase both profits and social impact through strategic pricing innovation." She distributed copies of her proposal to each board member, a sophisticated document that would have impressed graduate-level business students. If we reduced insulin prices by 60% in underserved American markets, volume increases would actually improve our total profits while providing life-saving medications to families who currently can't afford them. The board members reviewed her analysis with growing amazement. Maria had identified demographic segments, calculated price elasticity, projected volume increases, and estimated total revenue impacts with mathematical precision. The vote was unanimous. Wellington Industries would implement Maria's innovative pricing strategy as a pilot program, potentially revolutionizing their approach to market access and social responsibility. 2 years later, 11-year-old Maria Carmen Wellington had become something unprecedented in American business, a child whose strategic insights were reshaping a major corporation's fundamental approaches to both profit generation and social responsibility. The pricing innovations she'd proposed had increased Wellington Industries' revenues by 18%, while making life-saving medications accessible to over 200,000 additional patients. But Maria's greatest achievement wasn't financial. It was the transformation she'd inspired in her father's understanding of leadership and legacy. Maria, Harvard Business School wants to interview you for a case study on innovative strategic thinking, Marcus Wellington II announced as they reviewed quarterly reports in his office. They're particularly interested in how your demographic analysis led to our breakthrough in underserved market penetration. Maria looked up from the pharmaceutical research proposal she'd been evaluating, her 11-year-old face showing the serious expression that had become her trademark during business discussions. Will the case study include information about the families who can now afford diabetes medication because of our pricing changes? I'm sure they'll mention the social impact, her father replied, though he suspected the academic focus would emphasize financial performance over humanitarian outcomes. Then I'll do the interview, Maria decided. But I want to talk about Mrs. Patterson from our apartment building. She's been able to buy her heart medication regularly for the first time in 3 years because we made it affordable. That's more important than any revenue numbers. Marcus Wellington II smiled at his daughter's priorities, remembering how different his own values had been at her age. The child, who had been groomed from infancy to inherit a pharmaceutical empire, had developed moral principles that were reshaping the empire itself. Their conversation was interrupted by Isabella Santos entering the office with afternoon tea, a daily ritual that had evolved over 2 years of Maria's involvement with Wellington Industries. Isabella had initially felt intimidated by the corporate environment, but Maria had insisted that her aunt be included in important business discussions. "Mia, your teacher called," Isabella said, setting down the tea service with practiced efficiency. The standardized test results came back, and they want to discuss accelerating your academic program again. Maria sighed with the weariness of a child who had been dealing with educational bureaucracy for years. What do they want to accelerate now? Mathematics and economics. They think you should start taking college-level courses next year, Isabella explained, but I told them we need to discuss it as a family first. Marcus Wellington II felt familiar tension between wanting to maximize his daughter's intellectual development and respecting Isabella's concerns about preserving Maria's childhood. Over 2 years of co-parenting, he'd learned to value Isabella's practical wisdom about child development and emotional health. "What do you think, Maria?" he asked, deferring to his daughter's own judgment about her education. "I like learning advanced concepts," Maria admitted, "but I also want time to just be a kid sometimes. Maybe I can take some college courses while still doing normal 11-year-old things, like playing with David when I visit Seattle." The mention of her half-brother reminded everyone how successfully Maria had managed to maintain relationships with all parts of her complex family structure. Monthly visits to Seattle had strengthened her bond with Carmen and the Chen family, while her daily life with Isabella provided stability and emotional grounding. "There's something else we need to discuss," Marcus said, his tone becoming more serious. "The board has voted to establish the Maria Santos Wellington Foundation, focusing on educational opportunities for brilliant children from underfunded schools." Maria's eyes widened with surprise and excitement. "Really? We can help other kids like me get better education even if their families don't have money?" "The foundation will have an initial endowment of $50 million, Marcus continued, "and you'll serve as the youngest board member in philanthropic history, helping identify promising young minds who deserve opportunities to develop their gifts." Isabella's eyes filled with tears as she realized the magnitude of what her sacrifices had ultimately achieved. The little girl she'd raised in a tiny apartment had not only inherited a business empire, she'd transformed it into a force for social good. "Can we make sure the foundation helps kids from my old school, PS 234? Maria asked. "There are probably other children there who just need someone to recognize how smart they are." "That will be our first priority," Marcus assured her. "In fact, I'd like you to help design the screening process for identifying exceptional talent in underfunded educational environments." Diti, the successful businessman who had once prioritized corporate acquisitions over family relationships, had discovered that his most valuable investment was the time and attention he now devoted to understanding his remarkable daughter's vision for using wealth and intelligence to serve others. 4 years later, 15-year-old Maria Carmen Wellington stood before the United Nations General Assembly as the youngest keynote speaker in the organization's history, addressing global leaders about pharmaceutical accessibility and educational equity. The girl, who had once cried over complex business contracts, now commanded international attention for her innovative approaches to humanitarian capitalism. "Distinguished delegates, the question facing our global community isn't whether we can afford to provide essential medications and quality education to all people," Maria said, her voice carrying confidence that came from years of turning idealistic visions into practical realities. "The question is whether we can afford not to." In the VIP section, Marcus Wellington II sat between Isabella Santos and Carmen Rodriguez Chen, 3 adults whose different relationships with Maria had taught them that family bonds transcend biological connections and geographic distances. Marcus had evolved from a workaholic businessman into a thoughtful father who measured success by social impact rather than quarterly profits. Isabella had discovered that love and sacrifice could reshape entire corporate empires. Carmen had learned that sometimes the greatest act of maternal love is trusting others to provide what you cannot. Through the Maria Santos Wellington Foundation, we've identified over 3,000 exceptional young minds in underfunded schools across 47 countries, Maria continued, her presentation backed by data that demonstrated how educational investment generated both economic growth and social progress. "These children represent humanity's greatest untapped resource, intellectual capital that could solve our most pressing challenges if properly nurtured." The foundation had grown beyond anyone's initial expectations, becoming a global network that connected brilliant children with educational opportunities while maintaining their cultural connections and family relationships. Maria had insisted on this dual approach, having learned from her own experience that intellectual development without emotional grounding created isolation rather than fulfillment. Wellington Industries has demonstrated that pharmaceutical companies can increase profitability while dramatically expanding access to life-saving medications, Maria explained, sharing case studies from their pricing innovations that had revolutionized industry practices worldwide. Over the past 4 years, our affordable medication programs have served 2-3 million patients while generating record profits through volume expansion rather than price maximization. Marib, the transformation of Wellington Industries had inspired similar changes throughout the pharmaceutical sector, proving that Maria's vision of humanitarian capitalism could succeed on a massive scale. Other companies had adopted comparable strategies, creating industry-wide shift toward balancing profit generation with social responsibility. After her speech, Maria returned to her hotel suite, where her extended family had gathered to celebrate this milestone in her remarkable journey from confused 10-year-old to international advocate for educational and healthcare equity. "I'm proud of you, Mija," Isabella said, embracing the young woman who would always be her daughter, regardless of biological relationships. "You've become everything I hoped for, and more than I ever imagined possible." "You taught me the most important lesson," Maria replied, "that intelligence without compassion is just clever selfishness. Everything I've accomplished started with the values you showed me in our little apartment." Carmen approached with tears in her eyes, finally able to embrace the choice she'd made 15 years earlier. "I was terrified that giving you up meant losing you forever. Instead, it gave you the foundation to become someone who could change the world." Marcus Wellington II watched his daughter interact with the two women who had shaped her moral development, understanding that his greatest business success wasn't any corporate acquisition, but learning to prioritize relationships over transactions. "Maria, what's next for the foundation?" "I want to establish partnerships with universities in developing countries," Maria said, her analytical mind already working on the next phase of global educational equity. "Brilliant minds exist everywhere, but educational infrastructure doesn't. We need to build bridges between exceptional students and advanced learning opportunities, regardless of geography or economic circumstances." And as the evening progressed, Maria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her from a confused child struggling with business contracts to a young woman addressing world leaders about social justice. The path hadn't been straightforward. Family revelations, emotional upheavals, and the constant challenge of balancing multiple identities and loyalties. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the boardroom?" Marcus Wellington III asked, joining Maria on the hotel balcony overlooking the East River. "I think we would have found each other eventually," Maria replied thoughtfully. "Intelligence recognizes intelligence, and good people find ways to help each other. Maybe it wouldn't have happened the same way, but I believe the important connections always find a way to form." As the New York skyline glittered in the darkness, Maria Carmen Wellington stood at the threshold of unlimited possibilities, carrying with her the values of a poor woman who had sacrificed everything for love, the strategic mind of a businessman who had learned to balance profit with purpose, and the compassionate vision of a mother who had made the hardest choice of her life for her daughter's benefit. The girl who had once felt overwhelmed by complex business contracts now understood that the most important deals weren't negotiated in boardrooms, but forged through trust, sacrifice, and the recognition that true wealth lies in the ability to lift others while climbing toward your own dreams.